You're listening to episode 104 of Literacy in Color. Today's conversation is one I've personally been looking forward to. If you've ever wondered how the brain learns to read, why some students struggle, or what technology and AI might be doing to the way we read and think, you're in for an incredible discussion. Today's guest is someone who is a true expert in the reading brain and whose work has profoundly shaped the field of literacy. We're joined by Dr. Maryanne Wolf, a scholar, educator, and advocate for children and literacy around the world. She currently serves as the director of the Center for Dyslexia, Diverse Learners, and Social Justice at the UCLA Graduate School of Education and Information Studies. And she's also the author of Proust and the Squid and Reader Come Home, two groundbreaking books that have changed the way countless educators understand the reading brain, dyslexia, and deep reading, along with countless research papers and other publications. In this episode, we explore what's involved in building the reading circuit, what it means to build a biliterate reading brain, why fluency is so much more than reading quickly, how multi-component instruction strengthens reading development, and why deep reading has never been more important than it is today. Whether you're a teacher, interventionist, parent, or simply someone who loves language, I think you'll walk away seeing reading and our beautiful brains in an entirely new light. Welcome to the Literacy in Color podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Sullivan, a science of reading advocate with over a decade of experience as a reading interventionist and literacy coach. I'm passionate about making evidence-based instruction both effective and engaging. If you're interested in captivating our learners on reading fluently and understanding language, or as I like to call it, keeping it colorful, then you've found the right place. Each week, we'll explore intriguing lit bits and practical strategies around the science of reading and structured literacy to help you be colorful and teach colorfully. Are you ready to bring literacy to life? Let's color outside the lines and make an impact together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Literacy in Color. Today, I have the absolute privilege of speaking with Dr. Maryanne Wolf. And as much as this is going to be a treat for my listeners, this is a treat for me because this is a bucket list conversation of one of my most inspirational leaders in the field. So welcome to the show, Dr. Wolf. And perhaps you can share your background in literacy and how you came to this work.
Do you know, Michelle, it's a very odd story, actually. I'll make it brief, but it began in second grade because I was in a very sweet little school in the Midwest, and there were only two rooms in the school. First four grades on the left, last four grades on the right. And in second grade, I couldn't help it. I already knew the fourth graders. No one could help it because, you're just sitting there. And so I was totally bored with second grade material because, I'd already listened to what was happening later. And so I was a pest. The whole truth is that I was an absolute pest and I talked too much. I was disruptive without intent. But it was I have to say, they were wonderful nuns, but this poor nun just didn't know what to do. And she talked to my parents about it, said, I don't know what exactly we should do, but we need to make some kind of intervention so that she isn't disruptive. And so my parents, who were not wealthy, but they were well-meaning, actually bought a library of books for the back of the first to fourth grade room. And so it was amazing. It was like, for me, it was like a gold mine. And I read all the All About books. And of course, I wanted to be a saint. So all the different saint books. But it then moved into literature. And by the fourth grade, I really had a beautiful background over the denominator of books as my way to leave the tiny little town of El Dorado, Illinois, and enter all these worlds. And from then on, I will say that literature, books became my best of friends. To this moment, my home is categorized and alphabetized. And so by the time I got to college in real cities, I ended up never being able to choose between science and the arts, basically. And so I combined them. I have several degrees actually in English literature, always keeping psychology and special education in the repertoire that I was studying. But then I actually did a Peace Corps like stint teaching in rural Hawaii. And I understood what happens when kids can't read. And they would replicate the lives of their parents who were illiterate and who would never leave these Quonset hut-like settings for rural plantations. And that was it. I then went to Harvard, said, I have to understand reading seriously, how in the world we can make sure everyone can become literate. So it's a very unusual story in a way. Second grade, 2 degrees in English literature, and then a seemingly complete change into what we now call cognitive neuroscience. But all of these experiences were linked to how can we ensure that everyone understands how beautiful language is, oral language, written language, and how that propels that individual's life and ultimately society's life. So it's a unusual story of how I got to literacy.
And so lovely. And just hearing you talk about it, it brings your books to life as well, because coming from this cognitive science and
Yeah.
learning about the reading brain, you do it in such a beautiful, flowery way with such voice. And
Mhm.
you talk about deep reading, but you need deep reading to get through your books because you're referencing these ancient philosophers and
That's
classical
true.
literature and all of these things to bring your books to life. So it's fun to hear your story that way.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It takes a reader to read about reading in a serious way. And
Yeah.
that's what I actually hope my audience, if you will, and teachers, I want them to remember why they think this is so important and what it means to them personally. I think we become better teachers when we always remember that with regularity.
Yeah, 100%. And in Proust and the Squid, one of your titles, you reinforce this idea. Obviously, you're an expert in the reading brain, that our brains were never wired to read in the first place. So, taking this historical perspective
Mhm.
of our human evolution of the brain, can you kind of unpack this transformation our brains had to take in order for reading to even occur?
Right. You know, it was the smallest of thoughts that became one of the largest of thoughts that I ever had. It's like Piaget says, sometimes the simplest is the most complicated and important. And for me, when I'm studying what happens in reading, I actually, when I began in cognitive neuroscience, I was beginning with brain injured patients in aphasia and what's called alexia. And that was when the circuit's already formed and then it's damaged. But then I thought, oh my gosh, what about dyslexia? And so all these thoughts were percolating when I realized very late in my own education, very late that, my gosh, it wasn't ever there. In adults, it's there and it's impaired. But in children, they have to develop something that wasn't there. And so I then began the study of what it takes for the brain to make a new circuit. And the reality is that the brain, when it has a cognitive function like either literacy or numeracy, that's an invention, not a genetically programmed skill like language or set of skills like language, but something like an invention isn't there. And it was a profound thought for me. Ultimately, it was a simple thought that began, but it became profound because I realized, oh my gosh, this means that circuit is plastic. That circuit isn't there. So the brain has this great design principle. It makes new circuits by connecting the older parts that are genetically programmed, like language and vision and cognition. So reading is a brand new circuit. It's got to be taught. And if it's plastic, it's going to reflect the environment, which means teaching is so important. So the way that brain circuit learns to read is reflecting how it's taught, what language it's using, and more recently in my research, what medium it's using to read. Because the environment for a plastic circuit changes the circuit. How we teach changes the circuit. How we read on what medium changes the circuit. The more we read on one medium, changes the circuit to that dominant mode, which of course has great implications for the digital and AI world that we inhabit.
Yeah, yeah. It's so interesting to think about this neuroplasticity. We have to build reading circuitry, and yet that can come more easily for some children than others. So, what's happening in the dyslexic brain in comparison to a typically developing reader?
Well, Michelle, as you know, because you are in the same world that I'm in, when we say dyslexic, a lot of times we had a rather unidimensional view for many years that it was basically a deficit of a particular disconnection between information and the phonological regions, that the brain wasn't holding, and this is true for many a child, they aren't holding the phonemes long enough for them to be, if you will, integrated with the rest of the information that makes us able to decode a word. And so in dyslexia for many years, including up till now, people were more emphasizing the problem with the phoneme. And though that is true, over the last especially 20 years, we really have expanded our understanding of dyslexia and are much more conversant with what I loosely call the heterogeneity of dyslexia. And Michelle, it goes back to the circuit. The circuit has multiple parts, and phonemes are only one small part. And if you look at what are the profiles of children who will go on to have dyslexia, and I did this with my former PhD student, Ola Ozernoff-Palchik, and my wonderful colleague at MIT Brain Lab, John Gabrielli, and Elizabeth Norton. There's so many people who were involved in this study. What we found was that there's a small group who have this phonological weakness, and only that. They have phonological memory, and they have problems at that level. That's about 19%. Whereas a similar amount, small, have what I call the fluency-based area of weakness that is indexed by, of all things, my own test with Martha Denkler, which is called a RAN, which I know you know, but there are many copiers, if you will, of the RAN, and which is fine because what we want is people to realize that retrieval speed is an indicator of a later fluency problem, a later ability to integrate the components underlying it in time. So my work with Pat Bowers and others years ago was saying we called it the double deficit, but only as almost a literary device to say it's more than phonology. And so the areas that we have always studied are phonology, naming speed, and most importantly, 20 years ago we called it double, but now we only think about it as multiple. We have the children who have both phonology and naming speed and other things as well in this multiple deficit. And that makes up about 60% of the kids out there. And then there is another percentage, because if you start counting, there's still more left. And Jason Yateman, my colleague at Stanford, is really investigating with great seriousness a return to understanding the visual contribution. And so there are children who have a more distinctive visual. It's not that they can't see, it's that the visual information, it's not being integrated in the same way. So you have in dyslexia, with regard to the circuit, multiple areas of disconnection. That was a term the great neurologist Norman Geschkin used for aphasia and alexia. Where are the parts being connected or disconnected for a particular impairment? And 50 years after he had those insights, and he by no means had the tools we have today, he was correct. There are multiple possibilities. In fact, he read my dissertation, which was about retrieval and ran naming speed for both aphasic patients and dyslexic children. So it was quite an unusual moment in my research life to understand through Geschwin's eyes that we have multiple possibilities for the circuit to break down. The field still isn't there, frankly, Michelle. The field still sort of harbors an unnatural, I think, affection for thinking everything is phonology. I think many of us have gone well beyond that, but it still plays, even in the new IDA definition of dyslexia, I think a role that's important but insufficient. And the definition includes phonology and morphology, which I love, but they really didn't give enough what I would call attention to the research on how there are 8,500 papers around the world with different languages showing the first or second best predictor is naming speed. And it's not naming speed per naming speed. It's naming speed indexing different ways it can get disconnected. And phonology is one of them, but there are other areas. And so you want to really understand that fluency is not one thing. Fluency is a proof of integration of the components of the reading brain and a bridge to having enough automaticity to move into comprehension. And so dyslexia, we have, I think, last night, in fact, Michelle, I had an insomnia attack. I want to write Charlie Haynes in IDA and say, I'd like to make a friendly amendment so that we don't lose inside our examination of heterogeneity, the incredible, powerful role that fluency makes both for decoding and comprehension. And we have to index that in our screeners. Most screeners already have a RAN. So I'm not worrying that people won't be able to find that out soon. And by soon, I mean by first grade, you really want to go and do your interventions. But the implication, Michelle, and this is a very long-winded way of saying this, but it anticipates your next question or one of your next questions, and that is, why does this matter? It matters because understanding the predictors and the major characteristics helps us design interventions. So our whole, if you will, 20-year research program into intervention is based on understanding, especially with children who have fluency and comprehension problems that aren't being successfully intervened in our good structured literacy programs. We have to have much more emphasis on these other connections to oral language processes. And you and I have discussed this before our recording on how essential that we connect those phonological orthographic weaknesses. That's our phonics, and we have to have it. But that our research for 20 years has shown that our intervention is better when we combine phonics with emphases on the oral language processes, syntax, semantics, and morphology, and working to build fluency across all those 5 elements, which, as you know, I call POSSUM just to help. It's an acronym, but it's an acronym that makes you remember every day you teach. You are not just teaching phonics, you are teaching how phonology, orthography, semantics, syntax, and morphology works together as expanded foundational skills.
Yeah, I love that. And I think when you referenced before that reading brain, we have to connect the P to the O and also semantics. And we have so many models out there in the literature, Perfetti's lexical quality and
Oh, yeah.
the triangle model of word
Right.
recognition. And yet so many programs have this heavy emphasis on connecting phonology and orthography. And I think when that's the case, you are building accuracy, but you're missing that bridge to fluency.
Yeah, and of course, then fluency is the bridge to comprehension. Now, there is a set of studies, brand new, and you wouldn't know them, Michelle. I just barely heard about them. They were sent to me. They're coming from the Stanford Research Institute, which a wonderful foundation was helping them run studies of these good structured literacy programs in Florida. And they're the good ones, You Fly, Wilson, etc. So they're not like fly by night. These are really good programs. But what they found was because they didn't emphasize vocabulary, that they had less, if you will, success in intervention that would include fluency and comprehension. So the results were great decoding, but poor vocabulary, no generalization. And of course, that then translates into less good fluency and less good comprehension. And so for us, the Institute didn't know about our RAVO program or Maureen Lovett's Empower program or what we call the multi-component interventions. They seemed like they were unaware. Now they are going to be aware because I'm in contact with the foundation that made me aware of them, and now they're aware of the multi-component intervention. But it was proof to us from yet another source that the worst, most well-meaning assumption in the world of structured literacy is the belief that if you decode the word, you know it. And that's really a fallacy, that we have to really build simultaneously knowledge of the word and all that a word inhabits. That's what that circuit shows us, that when you're reading all of these, it's like an interactive orchestra of processes that are coming together that build fluency and that build comprehension, but they don't stop at decoding emphasis. And so I'm really on a hopeful mission to help people understand multi-components and their importance, especially in intervention, because the kids are too laborious with the decoding. And so the last thing they are doing, if they aren't helped, they're not learning language at the same level they need to.
Yeah. And so your POSSUM approach or your POSSUM framework is used within your RAVO program. So would you share the acronym of RAVO and what that intervention can look like for students?
Sure. Just like possum has multiple meanings, actually. The P it stands for, of course, phonics, phonology, and phonemes, but it also stands for polysemy. So under semantics, it's the multiple meanings. And by the same token, RAVO has multiple meanings. And in the beginning, it was all about retrieval, automaticity, vocabulary, and engagement and orthography. And that's the original possum approach, if you will. But over the last 20 years, we have, especially in my last book, Reader Come Home, the emphasis became important on deep reading to be equally connected. We always connect possum to connected text, always. And that's something, again, that the Stanford studies showed, that when you don't connect it to stories, you're missing an opportunity to use the thing you are decoding in a way that's meaningful. So the RAVO approach now is the same possum, but possum connected to deep reading with great emphasis, always, always on fluency, making this possum integrated fluently. So RAVO is, and now I'll just say one thing about the new way. Really, we're talking about reading automatically, but it connected to the new E especially is engagement as it was, but empathy, endurance, effort. And so the new title, even though we're not putting it on the box, is RAVO Possum. And what we're doing is taking all the original research and making it a very streamlined approach. Now, I have to say two things: a streamlined approach digitally for the teacher only. I want print-based materials for the student. And that's part of my research in Reader Come Home, was a proposal for what I call a biliterate brain. And by that, I don't mean the same term for multilingual advocates are using it. I'm using it as a term of learning how to read in print and having a parallel development of digital skills, but print-based materials for the first 10, 12 years, learning deep reading through print. And then as the child becomes an adolescent, a young adolescent, really being able to learn deep reading on any medium. And there will be more mediums over time than what we have now even. And we have to prepare for that moment now by saying what's most important. And for us, Ravo is the way we are building ultimately deep readers. And deep readers for us means children who are able to make an analogical connection between what they know, the background knowledge that they bring to bear, and their ability to infer from the text. This is very important for disinformation and misinformation. Being able to infer what the author is doing or what the story means. But next, perspective taking, having empathy for understanding others. In terms of deep reading, there's nothing more important, I believe, in this moment in our digital AI and polarized society than the ability to take on the perspective of others. And reading does that. So Ravo has a lot of minute stories that are decodable, but that grow with sophistication and demands on these deep reading processes. A lot about empathy, a lot about perseverance, endurance, a lot about effort that's important. We have characters for everything, frankly, Michelle. We have Mayor Mick, who teaches the many interesting connections among words, and Ms. Mim, who teaches that a word can have as many meanings as she has legs. And then we have these wonderful characters for Nina noun, Victor verb, because we're teaching grammar. And in the story comprehension, we're teaching through a great new character named T-Lex. But all of these characters are meant to engage and give a visual mnemonic. And also the strategies are all mnemonics that they can see in their mind an image, especially, when you think about multisensory, you don't realize how many senses you can use. We even have a Ravo Town song, which I dare not sing to you. But the kids feel, in fact, one of my favorite things that the kids said is, well, we just don't like to read, but we really like Ravo. And so I think, okay, yeah, okay, that's good. That's the start. But part of the, if you will, the secret sauce of Ravo is that POSSUM is taught with the S first. The semantic knowledge, the semantic background knowledge, we try to get them excited about words and what they know and all the different meanings. And every word that we use as a core word has multiple meanings. So if you just think about our first word, which is bat, you have the animal, the winged bat, and we have the bat, that's the wooden bat, and you have the verb bat. And so our stories can have bats who can bat with a bat. And you are making the mind or the brain be more cognitively flexible about the polysemous nature of words. And this data that we have shows that not only are they learning these words and their polysemous nature, they, a year later, are still better, significantly better, not only on the trained words, but on untrained words. They have learned how English works. So Ravo is really about the connections that go into POSSUM, fluency, and deep reading. I really think it's probably the most engaging program out there, only because we work so hard. And remember, and that's part of my life too, my first son is dyslexic, and Ravo began when I realized that the best OG teacher in the world, and I really mean, oh my gosh, Mary Briggs, I still thank her. Literally, I give talks in her honor because she really rescued my son, but he still wasn't fluent or in comprehending, even though it was the best OG. And OG can, of course, involve vocabulary and comprehension, and does, and many a good teacher. But I recognize that much of the program needed to be expanded. And so OG taught me a lot, and my son taught me a lot, but engagement was so important for him, because the only saving grace of having a mother who's a reading expert is that she knew when it wasn't working. And he actually helped even design a little word game that the new Ravo will have. Well, I'll just say one of them is turbo words, these race cars. Even though, as I said, it's all print, we have a few games that are digital to also increase the speed of recognition. So Ravo is my heart's desire for children who are struggling because was what I intended to help my son, and I could never be ahead of him enough. And we have our first grandchild, our family,
Yeah.
and I have no idea, but genetics is very important. This dyslexia, I'm gonna be ahead of the game for my grandchildren.
I love that, and I love all of the whimsy inside of Ravo, and,
Oh, thank
one
you.
of the things in your books too is you talk about the attentional systems being biological spotlights, and if we do not attend
That's right.
to the information in front of us, there's no way that we can get learning to even happen.
They don't store it, and so all the rules in the world can eventually be helpful, but wouldn't it be wonderful if those rules were attached to something that engages them and makes them remember, that's Mayor Mick, or that's Ms. Mim, or that's Nina Nell, or that's poor Mr. Ed, always at the end of words after the actions happened. And I've had children even tell me that long after they've had Rabo, they remember the characters. So that's our hope, that we are truly trying to engage that way, and we're engaging the multiple senses and giving them a chance to remember more easily than they do ordinarily.
Yeah, and I love how you start with language too, because words are
Yes,
interesting. Sounds can feel disjointed, and especially if you have a phonological core deficit,
exactly.
grounding in oral language, but also building language at the same time.
Yes.
And it just expands semantic networks, which we know helps with retrieval.
Exactly. And, Michelle, you reminded me of something I need to tell people. Retrieval can be absolutely invisible. You don't get a RAN every day, so you don't know that the retrieval system gets taxed. And that's a thing. There's stamina involved in all this. And when you're building an entire semantic network around a word, and we teach a child, one word well, then we have all these families think, 100, 100 words. We put the kids in a courtship with language, and that expands them and gives them alternatives when they can't retrieve a word. People neglect retrieval's importance in everyday language outside of reading. Now, that was brought home to me by the fact that I have not only a dyslexic son, I have a dysnomic son who's dysgraphic. Now, they're both dysnomic, have naming problems, but the second one has a totally different personality. He's the one who's actually the head of Needle Learning that houses Rabo. And he's worked 9 years at Google. We've had interesting conversations, as you can imagine, about the role of technology. But he's just, you don't know he has a retrieval problem because he has this rich vocabulary. And that rich vocabulary is always giving David these alternatives. And so his ability to speak about anything, I can't even believe that he doesn't have a PhD in reading. But underlying it are these issues that so many of our children have that we aren't aware of. So part of Ravo, Michelle, thank you so much, is giving opportunities to learn a broad semantic network from which to choose words when we can't find the one we want.
Yeah, that's so powerful. That's so powerful. And I love how you also are intentional with giving students printed materials. And you talked about deep reading and how that was kind of the impetus of your book, Reader Come Home. Like, come
Yes,
home to these analog
exactly.
days where you can read a text deeply and not be swept away with digital notifications that take your attention away from the
Yeah.
task. But what are some of the dangers that come with the attention being taken away digitally? I mean, you're talking about biliteracy, like it's important to be able to do both and switch.
Yeah, yeah, and it's indeed the case that we can't polarize everything the way we do. It's as if we have this tendency to this or this, as if there isn't a complementarity possible about what's useful for whom, when. And so for me, the digital acquisition of reading is problematic, but the print acquisition complemented by digital is, I believe, really helpful. So you can have both digital games, but never as the foreground. You see, I want complementarity, not exclusivity, and I want to be prominently using print for deep reading. Now, here's the reason, and it goes back to distraction. Screen, by its nature, hastens you, and so a certain amount of speed is good. Too much speed makes you a skimmer, unable to allocate attention to deep reading processes that take more time. This is a real trade-off, because when we talk about fluency, and it's actually can drive me crazy when people say, oh, we can't use this program because we didn't get fast enough words per minute after using it 3 months. Oh my God. You don't want to make these fast rules for teaching. You want to make sure you are flexible and understand that different children have different needs, both in speed and in technology. And so for especially some of our older readers, technology can help us engage them. Audiobooks. Some people are outlawing audiobooks. I'm going crazy. Our kids who can't read books right away, even though we want to help them, and that's part of our whole job is to help them love books, we can engage them with graphic novels, with audiobooks. And what we want is for them to learn to read and have as much practice so that circuit is really developing. Now, no diet should only be graphic novels and audiobooks. No way. I enjoy and really want to know over time the real benefit of putting print and audio together. I think there's a welcome direction. But over time, I think the real task is for the teacher to know the individual and how they change and what is that individual's best use over time. I believe that for most children, print is best for that 10 to 12 years, complemented by the screen, and then taught to use the screen in a wise way. So that's where I call digital wisdom, is when you know how to use deep reading skills on the screen. And I give an example that I don't usually give, but my intellectual rights lawyer in Boston read my book and he said, Maryanne, I have to spend my whole life on the screen. I'm so worried. I said, but what do you do? Because you are such a word-oriented person. He says, ah. And then he said, I freeze the screen. I freeze it. I don't allow myself to have the set to go, end. And he doesn't do it in a format in which he's distracted. So even though that lawyer is an adult expert reading brain, the implications for childhood are similar. How do we teach how to use deep reading? And how do we teach them to read more carefully and not skim for some material and not others? You can skim email, but you don't skim a contract. You don't skim a novel whose beauty will be so often lost by a distraction feeding screen that doesn't allow you to truly enter the lives, thoughts, and feelings of others in the same immersive way. So there's a lot of things going on with distraction. The real hard part, Michelle, is that our kids become inured and expectant of distraction and therefore are not learning to focus and concentrate as well they should. So part of our one more thing that a teacher of reading has to think about, and we have enormous things that we're already having to learn in terms of the science, but the science of learning is also important in how we utilize our understanding of the powerful nature of these technological tools for changing that circuit. They can make it really a skimming basic circuit that becomes so ingrained it doesn't know how to focus. It doesn't know how to concentrate. Therefore, it won't infer. It won't be critical enough to be able to evaluate the truth of that AI feed. We really have a lot of issues going on.
Yeah. I so appreciate your perspective and the nuance and that it's not black and white and that print is good and technology is bad, but we do have to be wise. And going back to the beginning where you're talking about
Yeah,
the plastic brain,
yeah,
we're growing up in a time where our brains can be wired to become skimmers, and we
yeah.
also don't want that.
Most adults right now have a battle going on. And just because of this work, I have a lot of email that the leitmotif of that is that what happened? I can't immerse myself anymore. I can't read long books. I certainly can't read long, dense books. I feel like my brain is thinning. And they're right. They are thinning, they're skimming not just words, they're skimming the circuit. They're not using it. And that's the maxim, I always say this, use it or lose it. It's what neuroscience teaches us about everything. And
Yeah.
it's a use it or lose it problem.
So, given everything, the reading brain and POSSUM and deep reading and technology, what's one thing that educators or parents should take into consideration to make sure that we can promote biliteracy and deep reading and deep word knowledge?
Well, one of the things is that from I won't say day one, day 180 in the infant's life, they should be reading to their child and never let go of it, even though your child is in school. Find a way to make it a ritual that's a family form of giving affection to the child, the tenderness that you have as a baby, that you're holding that child. Hold your child metaphorically through reading as long as that is possible. And here's where the screen is really going to distract because they are going to be so accustomed to the quick switching of their attention that you have to teach them the joy of focusing and concentrating, whether it's a teacher or the equivalent of Mr. Rogers right now, this wonderful teacher, this young woman who's just like a Ms. Rogers type, but teaches the child the beauty of the slowness of listening to what is being read. So one of the first things is there, read to your child, talk to your child, sing with your child. Just have all this language input, make it as rich as possible. And the second is it's your habits that they see. If you are always on your phone and not talking to them during dinner time, what do you expect to happen for the child? What reason do they have not to do similarly? In fact, it's the opposite. They are imitators. And so the more we are neglecting language opportunities through the screen, they will too. And so it's our habits that we want to model good habits. And that means good habits, not using it, but using it and using it wisely and well. Never allowing the 5 to 6 hours that many of our young people are doing. It's not, I don't want to be like Australia quite, no social media under 18 or whatever the age, I think it's 18, maybe 16. But if you make it the forbidden fruit, they will want it more. So it's more, what are the guidelines to making our children realize you are making your own brain through the way you read and the efforts you read. A big emphasis has to be on efforts and challenge. So you are building your brain. You really are either building it or not building it. What do you want to do? And so make them privy to this knowledge about effort is building the circuit. And that is to them too. So you can see it. That's just the fiction, right? Can you see?
Yeah, yeah.
Those, and then these are here. This is my morning samples of philosophy and theology. But it's like the habits that we show them are really important. And what we talk about books in front of them, read books with them, make the life of books a reward, not a punishment. Switch
Yeah.
it. Make it a switch. Make the purchase of books or the borrowing of books from library a chance to have special time. Let's switch it around because right now, the amount of books being read, there's an article in The Atlantic by Rose Horowitz, and she actually quoted me about this. We really are, the demise of leisure reading is going on. So, and that's, of course, intergenerational. And we have got to change that because people are saying, oh, AI is doing this, AI is doing that. AI is making you neglect the building of your circuit.
And we need to be part of that brain building club.
Yeah. Brain builders.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so true. If books are our currency, let's be rich in literature and
Yes.
have that take us far. So, Dr. Wolf, this has been such an insightful and inspiring conversation. Thank you for sharing your expertise. Maybe you can share where listeners can connect with you further or find out more about Ravo and
Oh,
POSSUM.
that would be great. We'd love it. So it's the CEO of Nido. I'd like you to know that Nido means nest in Italian. We want to
Oh,
build reading nests for kids and for adults. There's even something called Reader's Nest where ideas hatch. And I write essays, and my colleagues are writing essays. So you can go on nidolearning.com and read some of the essays on POSSUM and deep reading. And so regardless of Ravo, but if you want Ravo, write David, David, at nidolearning.com. That's it. NIDO. That's the important thing to remember no matter what. It's the nest that we hope where ideas will hatch for everyone. So thank you, Michelle. This was a pleasure. It was long in coming. You stuck with me. See, that's an example. Endurance. The E. Effort. That is everything. It's you are all the E's: engagement, empathy, endurance, and effort. 4 E's for Michelle.
Badge of honor.
Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
we'd love to be putting your recording on Nido Learning. I think that would be a delightful thing to have you in our conversation, which was as happy for me as any conversation I've had. So thanks so much.
That brings me so much joy. Thank you. And if we're speaking Italian, arrivederci.
Ah, yes, arrivederci. Grazie. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you so much for tuning into Literacy in Color. I hope today's episode left you feeling both inspired and equipped with something new to add to your teaching toolkit. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would truly mean so much to me if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps other educators find the show and join our colorful community. And don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more tips, tools, and resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes at michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week. Until then, be colorful and teach colorfully.